Philadelphia has a walk score of 75, which makes it one of the most pedestrian-friendly large cities in the United States. Nearly a third of its households don't own a car. In neighborhoods like Rittenhouse Square and Center City West, that walk score climbs to 99, which means a resident can go days or weeks without needing to drive anywhere. In a country where car ownership is the norm, that is unusual. Philadelphia is a mid-sized American city with a poverty rate that remains high for a major U.S. city and an average rent 41% lower than New York, Boston, and Washington. It does not have a subway grid blanketing every block, and its population density is nowhere near the level that makes giving up cars an obvious decision. By every measure that typically produces a walkable, transit-rich city, Philadelphia should not be one, and yet it is, and has been for longer than most American cities have existed. So how does a city end up more walkable, more livable, and more transit-connected than almost anywhere else in America without even trying to be? In 1665, London lost roughly 100,000 people to the bubonic plague. The following year, the Great Fire destroyed 13,000 homes and left 100,000 people without shelter. William Penn watched both of those disasters happen to a city that had no plan for either of them. And when he was given a charter to found a new settlement in the American colonies in 1682, he built his fear of what London had been into the design of everything. Penn's plan for Philadelphia was drawn up with his surveyor Thomas Holme, and it was unlike anything that existed in the colonies at the time. A rectangular grid spanning 2 miles between the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers, with streets wide enough that fire could not easily jump between buildings. Main streets ran 100 feet across, an almost extravagant width for the 17th century. The cross streets were narrower, but still wide by the standards of the time, designed so that the grid would breathe. Scattered across that grid, Penn placed 5 public squares, one at the center and one in each quadrant of the city. These were open lands set aside permanently for the free enjoyment of the people who lived nearby, a guarantee that no matter how dense the city became, its residents would never be more than a short walk from somewhere they could simply exist without the city pressing in on them. At a time when most cities treated every square foot as an opportunity to build something profitable, that was an unusual commitment. Penn called his vision a green country town, a city that would be wholesome, ordered, and resilient in a way that London had not been. Those squares are still there today, still public, still free, still surrounded by the same street grid Penn and Holme drew in 1682. What he could not have anticipated was that the moment speculators arrived, the decisions they made in pursuit of profit would accidentally produce something far more interesting than what Penn had planned. Penn's grid was generous. His blocks were large and his lots were spacious, designed to give residents room to breathe and grow. The speculators who bought into his plan saw those large blocks differently. They saw them as space that could be subdivided, and they subdivided them aggressively, carving narrow alleys and residential courts into the interiors of Penn's blocks to squeeze in as much housing as possible for the workers flooding into an industrial city. As a result, Philadelphia developed a layered network of streets and hidden interior courts, of wide cartways for vehicles, narrow footways for pedestrians, and privately maintained alleys that opened unexpectedly off busy commercial blocks. Elfreth's Alley, which dates to 1702 and is the oldest continuously inhabited residential street in the country, is a product of that same thinking. It survived as the city grew around it and the residents who owned it maintained it, generation after generation. Those narrow streets turned out to be one of the most consequential accidents in American urban history. Streets 25 feet across are a natural way of slowing traffic. Drivers slow down because the geometry of the street makes speed feel dangerous. Pedestrians claim the space because the scale of it belongs to them. The speculators who carved up Penn's blocks to maximize profit accidentally created an environment where walking felt natural and driving felt like an intrusion, and that environment has been influencing how people move through the city ever since. but the layout of the streets alone does not explain how Philadelphia ended up the way it is. The housing built on those streets is equally responsible. Philadelphia is a city of row houses. They outnumber every other housing type in the city, and they define the character of almost every neighborhood, from the colonial center to the mid-20th century suburbs within city limits. The row house was an industrial solution to a specific problem. How do you house a rapidly growing working population in a dense city while still giving each family a front door, a private interior, and a stake in the neighborhood they live in? The row house solved that problem with a form that is dense enough to support walkable streets and local shops, but still feels like a neighborhood rather than a housing complex. A block of row houses generates the foot traffic that keeps a corner store viable. It generates the eyes on the street that make a neighborhood feel safe. It generates the tax base that funds the transit that makes the whole system work. Standing on one of those blocks, with front doors opening directly onto the pavement and neighbors close enough to hear, it does not feel dense in the way a high-rise district feels dense. It feels inhabited. Philadelphia developed at least 4 distinct row house types across 3 centuries, from the diminutive Trinity homes of the colonial era, 400 to 600 square feet with 1 room per floor, to the streetcar townhouses of the 19th century with their front porches and bay windows, to the 20th century air lights with their ground-level garages. What that evolution tells you is that each generation of Philadelphians adapted the same underlying form rather than replacing it with something different. The city built on top of what was already there, which is why a block of colonial Trinities and a block of 1950s air lights can sit a few streets apart and still feel like they belong to the same city. That housing also created the conditions for a transit system that fits Philadelphia more precisely than almost any other American city. Philadelphia operates one of the oldest and most comprehensive trolley networks in the country, and its defining feature is something that exists almost nowhere else in the United States. In Center City, Philadelphia's trolleys run underground as high-speed subways. West of City Hall, they emerge onto street-level tracks and operate as ordinary surface cars running through residential neighborhoods. The same vehicle that functions as rapid transit downtown becomes a neighborhood streetcar as it moves outward, serving both the density of the urban center and the human scale of the surrounding row house districts without requiring passengers to transfer between systems. The reason that design works is that it matches the city's actual shape. Philadelphia does not have one overwhelmingly dense core surrounded by low-density sprawl. It has a consistent medium density spread evenly across a large area, which is exactly the condition that makes this kind of system possible. The underground section handles the heavy flow of trips in and out of Center City. The surface section handles the slower local trips a pure subway would miss. Strip out either half, and the system stops serving the city it was built for. The legacy railroad suburbs compounded this further. The Philadelphia region produced some of the country's earliest railroad suburbs, places like Germantown, the Main Line, and Chestnut Hill, where residents could live in quieter, less dense neighborhoods while remaining connected to the city by rail. A resident of Chestnut Hill is 30 minutes from Center City by train without owning a car. That means the choice to live without a car is not limited to people who can afford to live in the densest, most expensive parts of the city. It is available across a much wider range of neighborhoods and income levels than in almost any other American metro, which is why car ownership in Philadelphia, at 70.1% of households, sits more than 20 points below the national average. That $12,000 in annual savings is the result of everything Penn's grid, the speculators' alleys, the row house builders, and the transit engineers produced across 3 centuries. What none of them could have protected against was the moment in the middle of the 20th century when every other American city started tearing all of it down. By the 1950s, Philadelphia faced the same pressure every American city was facing. The highway lobby wanted to run interstates through the city center. Urban renewal programs were demolishing historic neighborhoods and replacing them with towers and park developments that gutted the street-level layout that made those neighborhoods function. Most American cities went along with both of those things, and the results are visible today in the surface parking lots, the sunken freeways, and the dead downtowns that those decisions left behind. Philadelphia's city planner Edmund Bacon made different choices. In Society Hill, one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, Bacon oversaw a renewal program that preserved much of the colonial rowhouses while integrating modern infill, like the Society Hill towers, into the existing street grid rather than replacing the grid with something new. Cities like Newark and St. Louis made the opposite call in the same era and spent the following decades watching the neighborhoods they cleared fail to regenerate. The streets Penn laid out in 1682 are still there in Society Hill, still lined with the same rowhouses, still at the same scale, which is why it is today one of the most valuable residential areas in the city. Bacon also inserted a network of pedestrian greenways into the city, mid-block brick and tree-lined paths designed to connect historical sites and parks while keeping people away from traffic. Those greenways build the assumption into the city itself that a person moving through it on foot deserves a direct, pleasant, car-free path between the places they want to go. You can walk from Independence Hall to Penn's Landing without crossing a single major road if you know which paths to take, and the city made sure those paths exist. In a country where pedestrian infrastructure is typically an afterthought added to the edges of roads designed for cars, that is a genuinely different starting point. Penn's original 5 squares remain through all of it. Much of central Philadelphia still has unusual proximity to green space, because a Quaker colonist in 1682 believed that a city without open land was a city waiting to burn. 340 years later, that decision still guides what it feels like to stand on a sidewalk in Philadelphia and decide where to go next. Philadelphia feels like a European city because it was finished before the forces that influenced every other American city had fully arrived. The car, the highway lobby, the zoning codes that sorted housing from commerce and people from jobs, all of it came after Philadelphia's basic structure was already set. By the time those forces arrived, there was simply too much already in place to tear out entirely. What makes that remarkable is how little of it was intentional. Penn was trying to prevent a fire, the rowhouse builders were trying to house factory workers, and Edmund Bacon was trying to save a neighborhood. None of them were trying to build a city that would still feel livable 3.5 centuries later, and none of them could have done it alone. The city they produced together is not replicable because that particular chain of accidents, near misses, and decisions made for entirely different reasons no longer exists anywhere. But it is legible, and the cities that tore all of it out made a permanent choice, even if they did not know it at the time.